Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. I am back with the manifesto book, and we're almost ready to continue. I just need to remember where we left off. Ah, yes, now I remember. The gold standard. Well, the traitor party, the nonce party. I mean the Labour Party, or maybe I was right the second time. I don't know about the first one this time. I think the second name is a lot better for Keir the Traitor Starmer's party, I would say, quite frankly. Lovely. So, let's get started. So, chapter 4.2, the gold standard. You might be thinking, what have economics and finance got to do with how the oligarchy control society and enrich themselves? Why should I care about cryptocurrency or gold, provided when I go to pay for my goods I get them? The short answer is this. The more mediation the oligarchy can put between you and physical reality, the more they can gaslight you and deceive you. Just like they do not want you to understand that Islam's aim is to subjugate you, just as they don't want you to understand that you live in a vastly less democratic society than ancient Greece 2,500 years ago. So they do not want you to understand economics and finance. The oligarchy move gradually and deceptively, which is how they can rob the economy and how they can replace the British people with immigrants long before the end of this century. See Appendix 1. These things are all connected. They are the limbs of the elephant. The American central bank has been the most powerful bank in the world throughout the last century. Alan Greenspan was the chairman of this bank between 1987 and to 2006, the longest-serving chairman in the bank's history. But 20 years before becoming the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, Greenspan wrote an article entitled Gold and Economic Freedom. It's a masterpiece of conciseness and insight, and in it Greenspan explains why statists, the oligarchy, are opposed to a nation's currency being backed by gold. After explaining the role of gold in economies, across time and across borders, Greenspan explains why the oligarchy hate currency backed by gold. Unless it's gold coffee, then it's quite nice. Anyway, deficit spending, where governments spend more than they can get in taxes, is simply a scheme for the confiscation of wealth. Gold stands in the way of this insidious process. It stands as a protector of property rights. If one grasps this, one has no difficulty in understanding the status antagonism towards the gold standard. That is, Greenspan argues that those who praise the state understand better than anyone that what holds back their power and their enrichment is the currency being limited by how much gold a nation's banks hold. Once the amount of currency is no longer limited in this way, then when the oligarchy can cream off more of the fake money created to enrich themselves, and with some of that they will buy gold as well as other things to store their newly stolen wealth. This freedom to create money allows the state, a tool of the oligarchy, to indulge in deficit spending, that is, to spend more money than the government can get from taxes or borrowing. And one of the things they do with this fake money is to bribe the electorate, principally with the idea of a welfare state. For 20 years before he became the top man of the central bank, Greenspan was telling people that in the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings through confiscation, or from confiscation rather, through inflation. We will show that for decades inflation has been worse than the oligarchy tell the public, and that it is only globalization that has stopped the public from being more fully aware about the inflationary effects of having no gold standard. If the statist opposition to gold as the basis of money was stroke number one, embodied in one man, it would be Lord Keynes, a Fabian socialist, whose economic theories have been used to justify the oligarchy's policies for the best part of a century. Keynes famously wrote in 1929 that having a currency related to gold was a barbarous relic. You might think Greenspan's words on the relationship between the fake money and the welfare state sounds cruel. No, it does not sound fucking cool, let me tell you. Statists argued that the gold standard was largely to blame for the credit debacle which led to the Great Depression. If the gold standard had not existed, they argued Britain's abandonment of gold payments in 1931 would not have caused the failure of banks all over the world. The irony it was that since 1913 we had been not on a gold standard but on what may be termed a mixed gold standard, yet it is gold that took the blame. But the opposition to the gold standard in any form from a growing number of welfare state advocates was prompted by a much subtler insight. The realization that the gold standard is incompatible with chronic deficit spending, the hallmark of the welfare state. However, the important thing to remember is this: the oligarchy have no concern for your welfare. All we are to them are animals to be farmed, they pretend that we, the common people, are in control of politics, when it is manifestly not so. Who voted for an average of 1 million immigrants to legally move to the UK in each of the years between 2016 and 2024? The current socialist government has been promising for decades it would reduce immigration to a trickle. Who voted for there to be thousands of mosques, Islamic centres and Islamic schools up and down the country? Virtually all of them exempt from tax when you are not exempt from tax yourself. Who voted for the people of Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya and Syria to be bombed in the past 3 decades by the military funded by us? Who voted for the USA to fund gain-of-function research in pathogenic organisms? Stroke number 2, in pathogenic organisms in places like Wuhan. The people of Britain were not given a vote on whether or not the country should join the EU, a planned superstate that for decades had been deceptively marketed as an economic community. The promise of the welfare state is part of the oligarchy system of control. In many liberal democracies, the welfare state is a new religion. We've shown you earlier how during the first half of the 20th century, novelists like Jack London and George Orwell tried to warn the public of how the oligarchy work, how they control and deceive the public. One of the ways in which they control and deceive the public is through the financial system. And here too a famous novelist attempted to warn the public and to give the public a narrative that would allow them to hold on to a framework that would allow the public to resist the manipulation by the oligarchy. In 1939, the movie The Wizard of Oz was released, and it is rated as the 3rd most watched movie in the history of cinema. It was based on a novel from 1900 by Frank Baum. There's good reason to believe that Baum's story was actually a warning about the importance of gold. The yellow brick road indicates gold stored in banks is stored as gold ingots, yellow bricks. Gold is measured in troy ounces, which is traditionally abbreviated to OZ. The Oz of the story's title, you can find many references throughout books on finance and even in government committees where this is the interpretation of the story of the Wizard of Oz. If you remember the story from the movie, the wizard of the title, the all-powerful Oz, turns out to be a bumbling old man hiding behind a curtain using elaborate tricks to convince everyone else that he is all-powerful. You can read this as an analogy for the function played by central bankers, a confidence trick played on the public to make the masses think that the oligarchy are managing the economy. Indeed, Hjalmar Schacht, I've probably butchered that name, was the president of Germany's central bank, Reichsbank, from 1923 to 1939. And when he came to publishing his autobiography in 1956, he titled it Confessions of the Old Wizard. Chapter 4.3, The Welfare State. The welfare state is just a carrot the oligarchy dangle in front of us farmed animals. Remember, at the end of Animal Farm, no animal ever got the retirement they were promised. Why are we animals being farmed by them? Taxation. Not only do the taxes we pay allow them to undertake hundreds of policies for which we're never voted, that we are taxed and that most of us diligently pay those taxes is what guarantees the money the oligarchy in one country borrow from the oligarchy in other parts of the world. If those foreign members of the oligarchy don't like what is being done in Britain, then they will withdraw their capital, making their displeasure felt quickly. Look at what happened with the short premiership of Liz Truss. when international finance decided it didn't give confidence in the decisions made by her government. She was gone within weeks, replaced by the spouse of an Indian billionaire. A man whose no member of the electorate had a say in getting him in. Sorry, I am not reading this very well, am I? Had a say in him getting the job. Taxation and money printing allow the oligarchy to carry out their grand plans, and they brook no opposition. It's hard for those who were born since 1900 to understand how pervasive is the taxation. In the UK, you are subject to at least these obvious forms of taxation: income tax, national insurance, value-added tax, council tax, excise duty on cigarettes, alcohol, etc., etc., road tax, the BBC tax, insurance tax, inheritance tax, capital gains tax, import duties, etc., etc. Some of these are sneakily hidden from most people. The sales tax, known as the value-added tax. Ignore for now the tax 3 threshold on income. If you earn £100 and you decide to fill up the fuel tank of your vehicle, you will have to pay at least £30 in income-related taxes, and then of the 70 left, 50 to 70% of what you spend on fuel is tax. This simple example should suffice to show just how much of your income goes on taxes, and often in ways which you are only marginally aware. Notice most receipts never refer to how much of what you charged as tax demanded by the government. For example, using our example from £100 in income, you might be left with around £30 to spend on actual fuel. The rest is consumed in taxation. By comparison with today's people in Britain 1908, sorry, my brain has just completely frozen. People in Britain in 1908 paid almost no tax. Lloyd George's People's Budget of 1909 did not see income taxes rocket. The rate stayed at 3.75% on earnings below £2,000, rising to 5% in the bracket with additional 2.5% super tax levied on earnings above £5,000, about £500,000 in today's 2019 money. This means that just after the time that Jack London published The Iron Heel, the super rich in Britain, those who would currently be earning over £500,000 today, would have paid a tax as high as 6%. Most people who were liable for tax would have paid income tax of 3.75%. Just a decade later, for the socialists, for by the early 1900s the liberals had become socialists, would be imposing income taxes of 30 to 50%. In times of peace, it is hard to significantly raise taxes and keep the public happy. Lord George borrowed rather than confront the population with taxes. If ever there was a turning point in the nature of Western government, the Great War was it. Now higher taxes could be justified. The standard rate of income rose from 6% in 1914 to 30% by 1918. Higher rates went over 50%. The oligarchy needed an excuse to be able to bring about more of their project, and World War I provided that excuse. I'm just looking for something real quick. Okay. The war was so ruinously expensive that the massive increases in taxation were not sufficient, and the British public were paying off the cost of World War I for nearly 100 years. The rest of the cost of World War I was paid through debt and inflation, the unofficial taxes. Shortly after hostilities broke out, Britain came off the gold standard and debased its money to help pay for the war. By 1921, the cost of living was at least 2.5 times higher than it was in 1914. By the end of World War I, in Britain, extensive taxation was the norm. The gold standard was effectively dead. The ancient currency in Britain was set on a path to worthlessness, and of course the hidden tax of inflation was rampant. The size of the state grew and grew, as some economists and historians came to realise. War leads to more socialism. The oligarchy got more and more powerful. Welfarism was the new religion. The oligarchy got increased power and increased riches. The public get increasingly sick and became increasingly dependent on the welfare statists. After each war, the oligarchy extend the welfare state, but in reality, the war is just a mechanism by which they extend their socialist power and their own enrichment. No surprise that understanding this, that we would predict they would bring about World War III to move into the next stage of social control. See chapter 4.7 and 4.8 below. But the welfare state is a failure for the public. We can't even begin to list the many ways in which this corrupt system fails, because the virtue-signalling leftists will hypocritically wail, "You're cruel and heartless!" So let's look at the ways in which the failures are undeniable. Sorry, I had to turn the screen back on. Anyway, and which even they will have to come to recognise. When the free National Health Service was created in Britain, it was claimed by the socialists that within a few years everyone would be so healthy that the NHS would no longer be needed. Rather like Marxism's claim that with the dictatorship of the proletariat, the state would simply disappear and everyone would spend their time on leisure rather than working hard. Let us consider the welfare outcomes on a range of issues that over the last 5 decades, where inflation was from, the money bubble. Obesity rates in England, and I account for half of it. Sorry. Anyway, men in 1980, 6%, women 9%. 1993, men 13%, women 16%. 2019, men 27%, women 29%. No, I'm not trying to slag women off. Stop asking. The data for the 1920s to 1960s would almost certainly show that the obesity rates were lower than 1980. Being obese or even just fat is a health problem. It's not just a question of being unexercised. The fat is stroke number 3, metabolically damaging. By 2023, Public Health England was saying that 63% of adults are above a healthy weight, with 30% of primary school children being fat. Obesity is associated with reduced life expectancy and a range of health conditions, including type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, liver and respiratory disease, and cancer. Obesity can also have an impact on mental health. Well, I think we all know that my mental health is quite fine. The only thing that ironically damages that shit is what I did as far as gambling is concerned, but we're not here to talk about my personal issues. If you look at photos of schools in the 1960s and 70s, you will see there wouldn't be any more than 2 or 3 fat children in the entire school. How is it that as the money bubble increases, as the size and the cost of the welfare state increases, as the public supposedly become more informed and more qualified, the population gets vastly fatter and sicker? The oligarchy claim they can control the climate of the entire planet, yet all their supposed efforts to improve the health of the public backfire. Either they can't control the climate, and that's just a bullshit scheme to siphon off money to the oligarchy, or they really don't care about the health of the farmed animals. The oligarchy just want us farmed animals to pay taxes and to be docile. These kinds of worse health outcomes are also found in other countries with a welfare state that has expanded in line with the money bubble. Look at the number of cases of diagnosed diabetes in the USA. 1980, 3%. 2010, 6%. 2021, 12%. And this is from the US Centre of Disease Control. And I forgot to give the source of the obesity rates, which comes from the UK Health Security Agency. Diabetes is not a trivial disease. It goes along with the destruction of many parts of the body. Many diseases that are considered different to diabetes, Alzheimer's, atherosclerosis, cardiovascular disease, nearly had a fourth one there, etc., may all be actually caused by the same things that are causing diabetes, principally lifestyle, and that mostly comes down to what foods you put in your mouth. Well, I constantly put chocolate in my mouth, so I guess there's not much hope for me there. Anyway, again, how can anyone believe the oligarchy claims they can control the climate if they can't stop diabetes from getting worse? But with both obesity and diabetes, the corporations profit, and the leaders of the corporations are members of the oligarchy funding the politicians. In the 1970s, a British professor of nutrition, John Yudkin, published a best-selling book on how sugar was causing a whole range of diseases in the West. And I quote, "The message was extremely unwelcome to the sugar industry and manufacturers of processed foods. These firms employed a number of methods to impede Yudkin's work. The final chapter of Pure, White and Deadly lists several examples of attempts to interfere with the funding of his research and to prevent its publication. It also refers to the rancorous language," and I never thought I'd see someone else use that word, quite frankly. But anyway, I digress. "The rancorous language and personal smears that Ansel Keys, the American stroke number 4, the epidemiologist who had proposed that saturated fat was the primary cause of heart disease, employed to dismiss the evidence that sugar was the true culprit. And we're currently at a stroke every 5 minutes. Yudkin's work was marginalised and has been forgotten, and instead of sugar, cholesterol was blamed. The oligarchy demonised cholesterol, something that is a necessary component for virtually every cell in the body, and 80% of cholesterol in the body is made by the body. The oligarchy promoted highly processed seed oils, sunflower oil, corn oil, etc., waste products passed off by oil refineries as food, instead of traditional natural fats such as butter. The oligarchy got richer, the public got sicker. The progressives would have you consume the output of oil refineries rather than the traditional animal fats your ancestors ate since long before the last ice age. You're getting stroke number 5, man alive. Progressively sicker is progress to the status. You become more dependent on the states. They want you sick enough to be weak, dependent and needy, but well enough to work and be taxed. The welfare statists push for the public to take a whole slew of medications from which the oligarchy would make untold billions. By 2020, the global market for statins was valued at $1 trillion. See, for most healthy people, benefits of statins may be marginal at best. British Medical Journal, 2020. If people knew the truth about the statistical tricks used to justify the effectiveness of statins or the mRNA vaccines, 99% of people would have never taken these medicines. Similar statistical trickery was performed to pretend that the mRNA vaccines were effective. By 2021, Peter McLaughlin met 2 medical nurses who independently informed him that none of the medical doctors in their hospital were taking the mRNA vaccine. But the nurses were being coerced into taking it. One nurse gave up her career rather than being forced to take something she knew the doctors were refusing. Immediately before this vaccine was made available, the oligarchy redefined what immunity from the disease meant, and they redefined vaccine so that they could claim this genetic engineering was a vaccine. For those who don't know, a vaccine is supposed to basically provide you immunity to a certain disease or effect. Like, I don't know, if you're going over to some fucking country in the Middle East or somewhere where there's loads of mosquitoes, they would give you a vaccine that would make you immune to the bites of those mosquitoes that would give you jaundice, which basically turns your skin yellow and all that shit. So basically, what they're doing here is they're willfully changing the word vaccine and immunity, turning it into a blatant lie that they can use to manipulate us, which is why people like me did not take the vaccine for COVID 1984. Moving on. Where was I? Yes. Then the oligarchy concealed all the serious side effects. Chief among them, I'll point this one out as well, since we're on this. Andrew Bridgens mentioned about a potential cover-up by the nonce party, I mean the Labour Party, or maybe I was right first time, who basically wanted to conceal the fact that one of the side effects of these vaccines was it caused inflammation of the arteries around the heart. But of course the mainstream media didn't want to tell you this. You know the drill, folks, because say it with me. It doesn't suit the narrative. So that is why they wanted to hide this shit, quite frankly. And the vaccine manufacturers demanded and received legal immunity in every country where they were to profit from the safe and effective, in air quotes, vaccine. A similar analysis to that of obesity can be done for cancer. The estimated lifetime risk of cancer for both men and women in the UK nearly doubled for those born in 1960 compared to those in 1930. And the rates of cancer are much higher for men than for women. Because women are a mascot group of the oligarchy, there is a massive emphasis given to the cancer of women and scant attention given to men. But in both cases, despite the massive state control, despite the welfare state, despite the war on cancer being declared in the 1960s, it's another state intervention that has failed. The more powerful the state, the corporations, the oligarchy become, then the worse the welfare of the population becomes. In the UK, there are 2.8 million people not working because of long-term sickness, after 75 years in which free healthcare has existed. That's nearly 10% of the working population claiming that they are unfit for work, or to work. How can anyone judge that the welfare state is a success? These kinds of benefits did not exist in the 1960s. In the 1960s, the unemployment rate in the UK was about 3%. At the time of writing, the unemployment rate is currently 4.2%. But if we include the 10% claiming sickness benefits, then the unemployment rate may be closer to 14%. One moment. Once again, consider the claim that the oligarchy can control the climate. Yet they can't keep the people healthy or in employment. Of course, this large pool of unemployed people gives the oligarchy another reason, shortage of workers, for importing over 1 million people every year in the past few years. Abortion on demand is for free, is another of the health benefits of the welfare state. In the UK, there are more than 200,000 abortions a year. These abortions are justified on the grounds that the unborn baby isn't a human being, which is actually worse than the National Socialists claim that Jews and other groups were subhuman. Since virtually no one will speak up for the babies, humans with no ability to speak for themselves, Jews at least spoke up for Jews, the hypocrisy over abortion is chilling. We're supposed to dote on the babies that a woman chooses not to kill, yet we are supposed to remain silent on those that she does kill. It's no wonder the oligarchy support abortion. It is another way in which they can justify immigration. Another 200,000 immigrants needed every year just to replace the babies killed by their mothers. Notice the silence of the medical profession about abortion. They bleat about the Hippocratic Oath, the foundational principle of which is do no harm. You might think that this oath makes no mention of aborting babies, but you'd be wrong. Abortion is specifically banned by the Hippocratic Oath. But in service to the oligarchy, for career progression and to toe the party line of their professional organisations, the vast majority of doctors remain quiet about abortion, genocide dressed up as medicine. No wonder virtually all medical doctors kept quiet about the likely state-funded origins of the COVID-19 84 virus. And virtually all of them kept quiet about the failed genetic therapy that was repurposed to give billions of people the experimental mRNA vaccine. This is the welfare produced by the oligarchy, courtesy of the money bubble. Between 2018 and 2021, the annual profit of Pfizer was about $30 billion. For the years 2021 to 2023, their annual profit was closer to $60 billion. COVID and the fake vaccine were very profitable for the oligarchy. If the mRNA genetic engineering was a real vaccine, the oligarchy would not have needed to redefine what a vaccine was in the months before they started to coerce the public to take what had been a failed cancer treatment. Nature, the most prestigious scientific journal in the world, had an article in 2021 about how Dr. Robert Malone invented mRNA genetic engineering. In 1987, but between months, he was being denounced by the oligarchy for warning people about the dangers of the mRNA vaccine. In late 2022, 18 months after the safe and effective vaccine was put to use, you could notice that suddenly across Europe TV adverts appearing warning about the medical condition of shingles. Shingles? I have no idea what shingles is. Someone's going to have to clue me in on that shit. Never in decades of TV were such adverts needed, like us. Maybe you've recently known the healthy young people in their 20s who suddenly got this condition post-vaccination. But that condition, whilst very painful, is relatively trivial compared to the vaccine-caused cardiomyopathy. Wait, hang on. Oh, I see why now. The neurological diseases, the cancers, and the overall increase in excess deaths. In the past, after the pandemics, the excess death rate in a society falls, as the pandemic, or scamdemic, whichever you want to call it, would bring early death to the least healthy. But after the COVID scamdemic, excess deaths had continued to be higher than would be expected. Yet this is something that the news media, the medical profession, nearly a sixth stroke there, and the politicians are all studiously avoiding. They know that the oligarchy wants them to keep silent, so the doctors keep quiet about abortion, highly processed industrial products being passed off as food, the lunacy around COVID, and the vaccine and excess deaths, etc., etc. If you cannot see that the socialists of all political parties see your welfare as that of a farmed animal, consider a recent report in The Guardian where the future of the NHS is preventative medicine, intense in supermarkets. The dream is to have a system similar when we had all our COVID jabs. There would be a tent erected in the Sainsbury's car park and we would all queue up to get jabs from COVID, flu, pneumococcus? I'm sorry, these words are new to me, so my brain is really being taxed by this shit. Yeah, that'll be 20% off. Anyway, shingles all at the same time. Then we would be given blood tests and genetic tests, and our family history would be scrutinised. And then those with any risk, even if they didn't yet have symptoms, would get long-acting injectable for lowering cholesterol, reducing blood, or weight management. Or reducing blood pressure, sorry. Does that not sound like the way the farmer would treat en masse his livestock, penning the animals in a tent and giving all the animals a stew of pharmaceutical treatments at the same time, whether they need them or not, in order to keep his livestock in the best possible health for the atrocious conditions under which the livestock are held? Do you think the oligarchy, with their private fucking... their private healthcare... Fucking hell, I'm fighting this stroke with my life here. Somebody call 999. Will allow themselves to be treated in this way? Yet that livestock scenario in The Guardian cites various members of the great and the good supporting it. John Deanfield, who is the professor of cardiology at the University of London, Westminster Private School, then Cambridge University, and Sir John Bell, professor of medicine at Oxford. According to Wikipedia, Bell earned over £260,000 in 1 year alone from a pharmaceutical company. The Guardian, who also cites Lord Pryor as supportive of this tent in a car park scenario, he went to the private Charterhouse School, then Cambridge University, before becoming a Conservative MP, and was then head of the NHS England. Do you think the great and the good will be queuing in supermarket car parks to be given a dozen unneeded treatments, like sheep being taken through some chemical dip for the good of the herd? Let's consider another supposed benefit of the welfare state. The leftist idea that people commit crime through poverty. In Britain, the prison population fell between 1915 and 1940, so during the Great Depression there was apparently less wealth and less criminality, but from 1940 onwards the prison population began to rise, and by 2020 it was about 450% higher than it was in 1920. Yet the welfare state had expanded massively. In case you are thinking that the increased prison population is just because the oligarchy's program of population replacement, see chapter 5 below, when it comes down to the government report, they show from 1941 onwards the prison population as a percentage of the population goes up. Our conclusion is that increased criminality is another product of the welfare state. Most of the people in receipt of welfare payments will get free legal representation, another welfare benefit, something that is to be denied the vast majority of those who pay taxes for the welfare state. Imagine the size of the prison populations if criminals did not get free legal representation. Moreover, the public is well aware that the proportion of criminals who are jailed is a tiny fraction of the total number of criminals. The crime rate in Britain went up by 300% from 1901 to 1950. Or between 1901 and 1950, then went up by a further 100% in the 1960s, an average of 1 million crimes a year. In the 1970s, it was 2 million crimes per year. In the 1980s, 3.5 million. The truth is that even the least educated person is able to make rational calculations. Criminals will happily state going to jail is the cost of doing business. If surrounded by friends and relatives making easy money from crime for years on end, why would someone choose debt and years of study to be less rich than those who they already know? Crime does pay, especially when you get free legal representation, and in prison you can do a degree for free, send out for food, get drugs, etc., etc., and most convicted criminals do not even get jailed, and most crimes are never solved. Moreover, there's a host of civil claims for which the poor get free legal representation, but the average citizen will not. For example, claims about immigration and asylum, race discrimination, etc., etc. We should never forget the oligarchy are complicit in the systematic of English schoolgirls by Muslim grooming gangs for at least the past 50 years. Between 1975 and 2010, virtually no one was prosecuted, although the hundreds of convictions after 2010 show the tip of the criminality. That shows that the oligarchy only selectively... Stroke number 6. It had to happen sooner or later, didn't it? Selectively pursue criminality, as the revolutionary socialist Jack London pointed out. Peter McLaughlin's book Easy Meat exposes the complicity of these institutions. Schools, police, charities, social workers, newspapers, etc. All institutions run by the oligarchy. The oligarchy are very selective about what information they collect on criminality. Thus, when Freedom of Information requests are sent about the government rates of murder in Britain over the past century, the government replies, "We don't have that data." Oh, I wonder why. If the oligarchy were truly concerned with the welfare of its citizens, don't you think that if there was only one crime for which they kept statistics, it would be murder? After all, it's outlawed in the Bible, so it's hardly a new form of criminality. Their selective collection of data is one of the ways in which they deceive the electorate. The politicians and journalists can always reply, there is no evidence that X is true. There's no evidence because the evidence is not deliberately kept. Is deliberately not kept. After hundreds of convictions of these Muslim gangs, can any of you point to a list of convictions, apart from the list maintained by Peter McLaughlin? Can any of you find a government list of all the successful and failed Islamic terrorist plots in the UK? They do not keep this information for a reason, because their claimed interest in your welfare is fraudulent. And that'll be all for today's. And it actually is rather coincidental because it leads us into chapter 4.4, where welfare leads. So, a little more information for you to digest, and 6 more strokes to add to the counter, which I think puts me on, if I recall correctly, 53? I think I also tried to put out another video this morning as well, which is going to basically put... No, sorry. The video I've done this morning and the video I've done yesterday, and then this is going to bring me to a total number of strokes of 53, basically, is what I'm trying to say. I'll just find that out. Yes, I even have a thing to myself so that I can see how many strokes I've had. And since we're on 53 strokes, that would imply... I'm going to have to get the calculator out on this one. It's more than 2.5 strokes a day. I do know that much. I think it's more along the lines of 2.72, if I recall correctly. So please bear with me. Divided by 18... Oh, it's actually 2.9. So we're actually nearly back on track again. Fucking hell. Of 3 strokes a day, it's 2.94 and 44 reoccurring. Fuck me. So yes, there is that. And I accept it can be a little repetitive and boring for some people, but would you rather it be, oh, I've had another stroke, or, sorry guys, I got a little bit tongue-tied, you know, that kind of shit. So that's the way I slice it, but we'll see what happens. See what happens in the near future. Protest in 2 weeks as well. We'll see how that goes. I might actually start making a playlist for the manifesto book, because at least then that will allow people to keep a track of everything and make it a little bit easier to go through that. It might make some good listening to at some point. But yeah, I will wish you all a good morning, afternoon, or evening. And I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye for now.